The following podcast contains spoilers and words that my mother would prefer I did not say. We watch the thing. We watch the thing. Hello everybody and welcome back to We Watched a Thing. This week I'm lucky enough to have with me one of the most incredible women from podcasting who does what I could never do, a brilliant solo show. It's Em from Verbal Diorama. How you doing, Em?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say you were lucky, but yes. Hello, Billy. Hi, everyone. And I guess you're wondering, what is a place like me doing in a girl like this?
I do consider myself lucky because, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and honestly, yours is one of the best. It's amazing. You've been doing it for over 2 years now, yeah?
Almost 3.
Almost 3. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, time goes fast. And every week you put out incredible content, and I know that you've done this film before. So
yes.
when I contacted you and said, would you mind coming on for an episode? And you said, look, can we do this? It's my mission to do this movie on as many podcasts as is humanly possible. I jumped at the chance because this is one of my all-time favorite movies as well. And when Topher was on the show, we had a rule that we couldn't do a movie that we'd both seen. It had to be one that the other person hadn't seen. And so we never got a chance to talk about this movie. And so I'm so excited to finally have someone to talk about The Mummy with. Yeah,
this is genuinely my favorite movie ever. And yes, it is true. I've been on a lot of podcasts to talk about The Mummy. And yes, it is my mission to talk about the movie as often as physically possible on literally every podcast in the world.
Well, I'm glad to be able to help you on that mission.
Thank you. But for now, I'm really, really happy to be here talking to you about this movie.
Thank you. Well, The Mummy is a 1999 American action-adventure film written and directed by Stephen Sommers. It's a remake of the 1932 film of the same name, and it stars Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Kevin J. O'Connor, and Arnold Vosloo. And what is it about, Em?
I mean, it's obviously, like you say, it's an action-adventure. It's also a romance. It's also a comedy. It's also a horror as well. And one of the things I really love about this movie is I feel like it blends all those genres really perfectly.
Yep.
But basically, the movie is about a young woman who, I can relate. Well, maybe not so much about the young, but I can relate. Who's basically, she lives in very much a man's world. It's the late 1920s. There's still a lot of stigma attached to being a woman and being a professional. And, she is into archaeology and Egyptology, and she's just fascinated with Egypt and everything to do with that. And obviously she has a brother. They kind of find this puzzle box, and they call it a puzzle box. It turns out to be a key. Inside the key is a map, the map to Hamunaptra, which is basically where it's rumoured that all of the kings of Egypt left all their treasure. And they basically go on a huge adventure to Hamunaptra. Evie accidentally awakens a mummy who has a 3,000-year-old curse upon him. It's the curse of the Homdai, because Imhotep was a very, very naughty boy and he decided to have an affair with the pharaoh's mistress, and their love is so strong that 3,000 years later he awakens and he's still in love with her. And basically, that is what all women want. 3,000 years later, for their man or their woman or whoever to still be madly in love with them. Yep. So basically, what we're saying is that, yes, Imhotep is technically evil. And yes, he basically rains down all of the plagues of Egypt on pretty much everyone.
But he's also the perfect man. Yeah.
He did it for love. So it's okay. And so they have to stop him. And that's basically The Mummy.
That's it.
And I'm so sorry I didn't plan that. That's just kind of what came off the top of my head. I mean, it's a really good job, isn't it, that I've seen this movie so many times that I literally know it off by heart, isn't it?
It is, yeah. As I said, I love this movie so much as well. I got hate on the show a couple of years ago when we did Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I spoke about how I think this is a far superior adventure movie. Like, I came to Indiana Jones very late, so this is my Indiana Jones. This is the adventure movie that I grew up with and love. I'm just assuming that you and I are around the same age. Did you see this movie when it came out?
I saw this movie. I didn't see it at the cinemas. I actually saw it when it came out on rental.
Yeah.
Because back in those days, it was VHS.
Yeah.
I rented it constantly, like pretty much constantly. So much so that when the rental shop, I don't know if it was like this in Australia, but certainly over here, the little rental shops that were kind of everywhere, occasionally they'd do like sales and they'd say, oh, X rental up for sale. And so they had an X rental copy of The Mummy, and it was probably the copy that I was constantly renting. And so I bought it. I still have it. Not at my house, but my parents have it at their house.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the most precious things that I've ever bought was this copy of The Mummy on rental, because then I could just watch it all the time. And it's just been pretty much since, because I didn't watch it in 1999, so it would have been like the year 2000.
Yeah.
So 21 years I've been watching this movie constantly, and oh my God, so old.
Yeah. I used to work in a video shop in the early 2000s. It was best job I ever had. I'd finish at midnight and just come home with movies and candy and just watch movies all night until I went to work again the next day. And it was just the best. But yes, I did see this at the cinemas in 99. I was 11 years old, and it was, I'll never forget it. Like, I used to go to the movies just about every weekend around that time, and yet I don't remember most of them, but this always stands out to me. You know, the image of the mummy's face in the sand will just always stick out in my head. I just love this movie so much.
I mean, I really do think that a lot of the special effects, you know, you've got to kind of appreciate this movie is well, it's the best part of 22 years old now. So, you know, the CG is not going to be brilliant. It's not going to be kind of to the level that what we'd expect now. But I still maintain it holds up. It holds up because it's not so special effects driven. I mean, the effects are important in the movie because you have to believe that Imhotep in mummy form is genuinely terrifying. And this is a movie that my mother still refuses to watch because she thinks it's really scary. So, you know, it has to be believably terrifying. And that, for me, kind of sets it apart from Raiders. Because from my heart, The Mummy is the better movie.
Yeah.
From my head, yes, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, it is. We would not have this movie without Raiders.
That's right. So it's very much a template for this film. Yeah.
Exactly. So I feel like I do love Raiders of the Lost Ark because I've covered it on my podcast, and I do have a genuine love for that movie and everything that they did, you know, with the character of Indiana Jones. You know, Rick O'Connell, I mean, I'm very controversial in that if I was given the choice between Indiana Jones and Rick O'Connell, it would be Rick O'Connell every single day. You know, they are very, very different movies. You know, Indiana Jones is more of like an action adventure movie. Whereas, like I say, this, you know, and yes, Indiana Jones does have, you know, some, you know, the comedy and the romance, but I kind of feel like The Mummy kind of stands very separately. Mainly because it is actually quite an effective horror movie. You know, I remember the first time I saw the scarab beetles come up out of the ground.
Oh.
And, you know, it's genuine terrifying stuff to have, like, these beetles chasing you that will literally go inside you and eat your flesh.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, this is genuine
exactly
terrifying
right.
stuff.
Like, regardless of the execution, just the concept of that is terrifying. Just, you know, even, and I agree with you, I actually think the visuals in this film hold up really well as well. But even that aside, the second you see the bug in his skin, it almost doesn't even matter how it looks because you want to cover your eyes, because just the thought of a bug crawling inside your body like that is pure horror.
It's proper nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
And, you know, I look, you say, you've kind of got to detach the whole kind of occasionally honky CG. I mean, I'd argue that the scene specifically where the bug is kind of crawling through the warden's skin. Obviously, the warden is played by Omid Jalili, who's a very famous British comic. So it's always really interesting to see Omid Jalili in this movie because, you know, he kind of plays it a bit straight in this movie. And I've always known him as a comedian. So, to have kind of this quite honky CG bug crawling through his skin, you know, yes, it doesn't look brilliant, you know, when you compare it to today's standards, but just the mere fact that it's under his skin, you know, that it goes, it crawls through his foot, it goes up and it goes to his brain, you know, to the point where he actually kills himself by running into a wall. You know, it's like that's the sort of horror that it's like, it's almost body horror in a way. And body horror is one of the worst. It's kind of makes you squirm, you know, it makes you feel uncomfortable thinking, oh God, you know, that I wouldn't want that there. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't want bugs under my skin. Thank you very much.
But yeah, I think most of the CG holds up pretty well when you consider, you know, like you say, better past 22 years now. And I think a lot of that goes to this was still the time. You know, I think we get more issues with The Mummy Returns when they really went all in on CG. You know, they're trying to do everything bigger and better. With this, there is still so many practical effects that the blend works quite well. You know, there's a lot of really great makeup and prosthetic work going on here as well. And I think that blend is, for the most part, pretty effective. Like even the Mummy himself, as he kind of goes through those progressive stages of becoming more and more human-like, I actually think that he looks pretty good, really. Yeah,
and obviously he, as a CG character, you know, motion capture was kind of in its earlier forms in 1999. And the kind of motion capture that they did for The Mummy was some of the first kind of CG motion capture work that they actually did. Yep. So the fact that he actually does look quite decent. I mean, I'm no expert on, you know, lighting and stuff like that, but just little things like that. I've noticed that he does seem like reasonably well lit in the scene as well. Like it feels like he is tangible enough in the scenes. Yeah. But when you've actually got Arnold Vosloo and he's kind of a little bit half and half and he's got like half his cheek missing and all of that sort of stuff, you know, I still think that looks genuinely terrifying. And, you know, he is supposed to be genuinely terrifying in many ways. Once he becomes full Arnold Vosloo, in a way, it kind of loses a little bit of that because then he looks human.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
You know, I feel like even the greatest movie in the world, you've kind of got to have a little bit of a foible here and there because, you know, nothing's 100% perfect. But I feel like they kind of had to do that because otherwise poor Arnold Vosloo wanted to be on screen at some point. So, you know, give the man what he wants. But yeah, very, very minor thing. But before he becomes full Arnold Vosloo, he's definitely an intimidating creature.
Yeah, and, you know, I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that even though this is early motion capture, it's still a real performance, which means that all of the movements have weight. You know, this is 2 years before we got Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and I'd argue that, honestly, this looks about on par with that. I don't think that it had evolved that much by then. And because it is a real performance, all of the movements, they carry real tremendous weight and gravity to them, which does make it very much more real and scary and imposing. Let's talk about the design of The Mummy then. Have you seen the original 1930s, the Universal monster movie Mummy?
No. No. It's one of those that I really do want to see. Yeah. And mainly because I know that they took so much from that movie for this one. You know, they paid proper homage to that movie in this one. And I kind of really like that they actually kind of took the time to really... even like characters, you know, like Imhotep and Ardith Bey, and technically they were one and the same in the original movie. Ardith Bey was also Imhotep, but you know, we got a different Ardith Bey here, and I mean, Oded Fair is, wow, what a man! It's basically what I feel about this movie is that they literally cast the most attractive people in the world in this movie. Everyone in this movie is super attractive.
Yeah. Every time I watch this movie, I think of that meme that goes around, you know, my sexual orientation is the cast of 1999's The Mummy. And it's absolutely true.
I wish I'd created that meme. Because I feel that meme all the time. But no, I haven't seen the original, but I do really want to.
Yeah. So I'm sure that, and I'm sure that you covered this in your show, that this film went through a huge development period and there were 5 scripts written before they landed on this one. You know, George A. Romero was attached twice to direct with 2 different versions of the film. And I think that most of the previous iterations lent much more into the horror of it. And then I think it was only when Sommers came on that they kind of morphed it into more of an action, adventure, romance, like all these genres blended together, like you say, which I absolutely love. Are you a horror fan? Like, do you think that you would have the love for this film that you do if it lent even slightly more into the horror?
Me and horror, we have a very contentious relationship. I've always said, I'm not the biggest fan of horror. And then, I've covered the odd horror movie on Verbal Diorama. And they tend to be kind of, movies like The Cabin in the Woods. Yeah. And I've done like Scream and I've done The Thing and I've done Gremlins, Yeah. And I think for me, I don't enjoy horror. See, it's really weird. Like I say, it's a contentious relationship because I don't enjoy horror, but I like horror blends. Like I like horror comedy. I like sci-fi horror. Like I love Alien. To me, like Alien is like one of the pinnacles of, not only sci-fi horror, but horror, it genuinely terrifies me. A full-blown like psychological horror, I will not watch. Yeah. I guarantee you I will not watch it. I don't want to sit there and be constantly terrified. Like that does not speak of enjoyment to me. But if it is like a sci-fi horror or a comedy horror or even something like this where you have got elements of horror that are genuinely quite scary on their own, but then you can mix it up a little bit because you do have that kind of action and adventure and romance and comedy in there as well. I find that a lot more palatable. Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of to this movie's strengths. And you mentioned The Mummy Returns, which I've also covered on my podcast, actually. Yeah. And The Mummy Returns is really fascinating because it feels like they really wanted it to be so much bigger and better and like bolder than this one. And I mean, it didn't deliver for me, not just because of the advanced CGI that they do in that movie, but also because I feel like it lost a lot of those elements, when you say an action movie and an adventure movie and, all of those like the 5 perfect elements that The Mummy has, those 5 genres. Yeah. I feel like they're all lacking a little bit in the sequel. I genuinely feel like this movie is quite miraculous. And I feel like loads of movies are miraculous, but I feel like this one is especially miraculous because it's a very kind of certain type of movie that, it wasn't really kind of a thing, especially in the late 90s. Yeah. It feels very unique in that respect. And they've tried to emulate it. I mean, we were all there in 2017 when Tom Cruise decided to, not just him, obviously, some of the people too, decided to resurrect the franchise. And what a complete disaster it was.
Well, I think this is the thing. This film, like you say, it's so unique, and I think it just came at the perfect time in cinema when you could do something like this. I don't think they could make a movie like this today because, as we saw with 2017's The Mummy, everything needs to be grittier and darker and heavier. So you lose the lightness that so much of this film is, everything in this film, and this isn't a bad thing at all. I think this is a great thing. Everything in this film feels very light. It's horror light. It's comedy without being in your face, laugh out loud all the time. It's adventure without, you know what I mean? It's just, and that's why all of these genres blend so well together. And I just don't think they could get away with that these days. I mean, even you look at horror films for the last 5 years, we have really started to lean much more towards dark psychological horror, which I like, but, give me Scream any day as well. I love that kind of genre blend, which we're getting less and less of in this current climate.
Yeah, and I mean, I must admit, I don't really understand so much the fascination with, being so petrified that, you're afraid to actually leave your seat. You're so scared.
Yeah.
I personally, I don't understand how people love that, but I know so many people do love that because, recent years, horror movies have completely blown up. And to a degree, I often feel like, well, maybe I should give, I don't know, something like Midsummer a go, because everyone says how great Midsummer is. But I feel like I'm not going to enjoy it because I don't have anything to kind of fall back on, because at least with a movie like this, even if you're not keen on the horror, like you're a bit scared and you want to kind of, shield your eyes from the horror, then it's not going to be like constant in your face horror every single scene, and the suspense and the fear and all of that sort of stuff. Because the next scene, like you say, to call this movie light is not doing it a disservice in any kind of stretch, because it's palatable.
Yes.
Like it is the sort of movie that you can, well, technically you can't watch it with the family because over here it's 15 rated. So maybe don't watch it with your kids. But technically it kind of does lean more towards that. You can watch it with a group of friends and everyone will get something out of it.
That's right. Any mood you're in, you can watch this movie, which is why I'm always shocked when I look at, the Rotten Tomatoes or the Metacritic for this film. And I don't understand.
Ridiculous.
Like, how could anybody not have fun with this movie? There's no way to not enjoy yourself watching this movie, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the Rotten Tomatoes score, and I know that Rotten Tomatoes, you should always take those scores with a pinch of salt anyway. But for this movie, I mean, I think it's an absolute travesty that I think the last time I looked, I think it was like 66%. I don't know what it is now. But 66%, I mean, that's ludicrous to me. To me, this is a 5-star movie. To me, this is 5 out of 5. It's 10 out of 10. This is everything that is brilliant and joyous and wonderful about going to the cinema. Yeah. To just sit and watch something and just enjoy it, and to have characters on screen that you actually root for, apart from Benny. But even to a degree, you can understand Benny's motivations.
Yeah.
At least, yes, he's a sniveling little coward, but at least he's that throughout the movie. He's not like pretending to be a coward. That's just who he is. But yeah, characters you can actually root for, and it really genuinely, and like I say, they're all really hot. So why would you not want to sit and watch this for 2 hours? Because you've got literal hotness on screen. You've got anything that anyone's preference is displayed on screen in this movie.
You really do.
Literally, yeah. If you're into mummies, even if you're into like undead, 3,000-year-old juicy mummies, they are on screen in this movie for you.
Let's talk about the cast then. I think from memory, this must have been the first time that I saw Rachel Weisz, and she is so great in this film. And I love that when I asked you what this movie is about, you started with her, because I do think that your inclination would be to go, well, Brendan Fraser is the star of this movie. But no, I think you're right. I think that Evie is very much the main character of this film, even though, and that's what I love about what this film does is, yes, it kind of uses Indiana Jones as like a bit of a template, but it kind of splits those characters out. Like Evie is more that kind of academic archaeologist side of Indy. And then you've got the swashbuckling adventurer in kind of Brendan Fraser, but they both kind of really complement each other. I love the casting and the characters of this film.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I do love Brendan Fraser. Like, I think he's incredible. And obviously he had a period of time like in the late 90s, early 2000s where he was one of the biggest actors in the world. Yeah. And, he's obviously had some personal dramas in his life, and, he came out about, being sexually abused and all of that sort of stuff. And I I feel like I'm so excited the fact that he's kind of the Renaissance or whatever it's called, the fact that he's been cast in like Darren Aronofsky and Martin Scorsese movies.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see him because I've missed him. I've
Same.
genuinely missed him in cinema. He's a wonderful actor. He's, by all accounts, a wonderful person. And I think, this movie cemented him as this kind of real box office draw, like this, attractive leading man, who has this charisma on screen. So I kind of don't want to take anything away from Brendan Fraser because I really, really do love him just generally in life, but I love him in this. But for me, this is Rachel Weisz's movie. This is Evie's movie. This is a character that has been incredibly important to me personally, sort of throughout my whole life, because female representation in movies just generally is pretty duff.
Yeah, and especially at this period of time. You think back to the 90s, it was almost non-existent.
Well, exactly. And if you did have a woman on screen, she was the nagging wife or she was the helpless damsel in distress. And don't get me wrong, there is a point in this movie where Evie is referred to as a damsel in distress. She is captured by Imhotep and they have to go and save her.
Yeah.
But Evie has so much agency in this movie. She is the smart one. She is dependable. She is the one who can translate all of these, she speaks ancient Egyptian. She can read hieroglyphics. She can read hieratic. No one else in the movie, apart from maybe the curator, can do that.
Yeah.
She is absolutely 100% integral to the whole plot of this movie. And yes, arguably she does release Imhotep. And yes, maybe that wasn't particularly smart of her, but I forgive her for that because people make mistakes. And I feel like a lot of the time women in movies are expected to be, either this kind of trophy or be constantly perfect or be, the ditz in the corner. And Evie feels like a real person.
Yeah.
She feels like, yes, she is super intelligent and she has all of this kind of going for her. But yes, sometimes, she gets drunk and she says stupid things. And, she makes mistakes, but she learns from them and she kind of wants to fix them. She wants to save the world. She's the one who wants to do something. Rick's the one who says, actually, no, I don't want to do it. This is none of my business. She is so important, I think, for general kind of female representation, especially for me growing up watching movies like this and kind of thinking, well, where is me on screen?
Yeah.
And I've always felt a huge affinity to Evie and Rachel Weisz is someone whose career I've followed sort of throughout the years, and she remains one of the most incredible. She's literally she wasn't the queen in The Favourite, but she might as well have been the queen in The Favourite because
she is
literally the queen.
Yeah.
I love The Favourite.
Oh, me too.
I mean, obviously, Olivia Colman as well. Both queens.
Yeah. Fantastic film. Yeah, I love really her so much in this film. And let's face it, I would have released Imhotep as well. I don't blame her for that. If you've been searching your whole life for these artifacts and you find this incredible old book of legend and you're one of the only people in the world who can read it, you're going to read it. You're going to open it up and,
I mean, I forgive her for releasing Imhotep just purely for the fact, like you say, she is the only person who can do it.
Yeah.
But, of course you get excited. Of course you want to read the book. I get that.
Yeah.
I really do feel like after this movie, female representation kind of went a bit downhill again, after. And I feel like it's only in kind of, more recent years where it's actually been a bit more acceptable to have a woman kind of on the team, for example, who is smart and who is kind of self-sufficient. And, and then you think, well, this movie was set in the late 20s and how difficult it must have been for a woman to be believed and to be respected. But I think that it had to be a period piece. Though They tried to do it modern in the 2017 version. They tried to do it contemporary, and it was an absolute pile of poop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it had to be a period piece, and I think it's beneficial for it to be a period piece.
I reckon you're right. Probably really only in the last 10 to 15 years has representation of women in film picked up, and I think a lot of that has to do with female writers and directors finally getting more stead in Hollywood. Let's go back to Brendan Fraser as well, because not to take anything away from him. And as you say, this was the start of him becoming huge. And I remember just prior to this, he was mostly, and he made that transition that a lot of actors have made or started to make and failed. You know, Chris Pratt starting in comedy and then moving into action. Brendan Fraser was the same. I remember prior to this, the things I remember him from most are George of the Jungle and Dudley Do-Right, which are kind of silly family films, which he was great in. And then around this time, I think it was that we got Blast from the Past. Might have been the same year or the year after, where we got to see him in a bit of a romantic lead. But I think he's so fantastic in this film. He has such charisma and personality. You just want to root for him because he seems like such a fun person to hang out with.
I mean, you can totally understand why when Evie meets this kind of, dirty, rugged guy in a Egyptian prison, and then you kind of see him and he's all clean and tidy, and you kind of get that look from Evie as like, whoa, and that's the thing, the audience is on her side. Like, the audience is like, oh wow, like, he cleans up, like he is the sort of guy that you can take home to meet your mother, and but then he's also, he's got that kind of adventurous streak, a little bit of a bad boy thing going on, which I mean, that's kind of my thing, unfortunately for me. But you understand why she would feel the way that she feels about him, because as the audience, you're feeling the way that she's feeling about him. And I think that's like, men want to be him, and women want to be with him, that sort of, I know it's a bit of an old saying, but
it's so true though. This film is 22 years old and I still want to be Rick O'Connell every day of my life.
Because he's so cool, right?
I must say though, just when you were talking about him in the prison, this is always one of my favorite funny little things in movies, is that he was in the prison long enough for his hair to grow as long as it was. Yet his teeth were perfectly white. Like, they'd clearly still been giving him toothpaste in this prison. They couldn't afford scissors, but toothpaste is fine.
Yeah. It's it is one of those Hollywood things, isn't it? And I'll remember, just going a bit off topic, but I'll always remember. Have you ever seen the movie From Hell?
Oh, I have, but a very long time ago.
Because I'll always remember that movie had Heather Graham in it. And obviously Heather Graham, one of the most beautiful women, literally in the whole world. And yet, I always remember I watched that movie and I couldn't get her teeth out of my mind, because she has like really dirty teeth. Because, it's set whenever, I can't even remember when it's set. It's like Jack the Ripper time.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have these perfectly white teeth. And so it kind of really sticks in my memory. I'm like, but Heather Graham's got wonderful teeth. Like, what's going on? But
it's always funny what these actors are. Maybe Brendan Fraser was like, "Look, I'm willing to do my hair out, but that's as ugly as you can make me." Because let's be honest, you cannot make that man ugly. Like, even if you try really hard, he's still one of the most attractive men in the world. Yeah. So true.
But it's just a Hollywood thing, isn't it? But it is kind of funny if you think about it.
We've already spoken a little bit about Arnold Vosloo as well, but I think he's a very, very strong villain in this film. Every time this film starts, I always think it's Billy Zane. I don't know why. The first 5 minutes, it takes me a while for my brain to adjust and go, no, that's not Billy Zane. But he has very good stage presence in this film. He's threatening and imposing, and just everything you need him to deliver, he's got in this film.
Yeah, I think Arnold Vosloo is really underrated, actually. And I'll be honest, I've not seen him in much else.
No, same.
So I can't really compare his performance here. But I feel like he does have that presence and he does have that kind of intimidation. But I guess the hopeless romantic in me just literally sees Imhotep as this kind of, 3,000-year-old romantic hero who literally will do anything to get his girl back.
Yeah, it's a tragic love story. Yeah.
It is. And I think, a lot of the times we, because it's kind of brushed over a little bit and because we're so focused on Rick and Evie and Jonathan and the good guys and what they're doing, you kind of got to ask yourself the question, if that was you and you loved someone so much that you were willing to go against your pharaoh and you were willing to go through the most horrific mummification that ever existed, you were willing to have this curse put on you. And I mean, that is like what romance movies have been portraying for centuries, this kind of everlasting love, this love from beyond the grave, that it doesn't matter if you die, that your love will go on, sorry to quote Celine Dion, but
I love Celine Dion, actually, so you're fine here.
That's heart will go on, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of adds to the strength of this movie. Is that it's not in your face about it. It's not saying every 5 minutes, Imhotep really loves an next to the moon, it's very much in the background. But the fact that he's doing all this, he's not doing it because he's a genuinely evil being.
Yep.
This is just his only way of getting his one true love back.
Yeah.
And that's really actually quite sweet.
I agree 100%. I think at least for me, that's definitely a reason why this movie has stuck with me, because I'm a softie. I'm a hopeless romantic through and through. I grew up listening to The Cure from a very young age. Recently, I did Wizard of Oz on the show with Stacey from Movie Reviews and 20 Qs and revealed that my favourite character in that 100% is the Tin Man, because I love that yearning that he has to have a heart, to be able to love. And the way he talks about it, he clearly already has that. Like he's such a loving creature. And I feel exactly the same way here. That kind of tragic love story, it 100% sucks you in, definitely. And I think it's an interesting and bold move to shift that mummy design. We think of a mummy as, that wrapped in bandages kind of, and I think the move to eventually make him more human looking, even though, as you said, it kind of undercuts the horror of it, I think to some extent it just kind of elevates the fact that his motivations are very human as much as he is a supernatural being. I think it's a really clever choice.
Yeah, I really agree with that, actually.
What do you think? I was surprised. I was doing a little bit of research, which I don't often do, I'm not going to lie. But, I knew I had the queen of research on the show, and I'm sure that you know this, but test audiences did not like the title of the film, The Mummy. What do you make of that? Because I've never really thought about it. I never really had a beef with it. I can't imagine what else you would title this movie.
I feel like, first of all, test audiences are sometimes a bit dumb.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Yeah.
I mean, so many movies have been changed from their original intention because a test audience didn't get it.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the time they obviously base decisions on test audiences, and I kind of wonder where they get these people from. Like, have these people ever seen a movie before in their life?
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. I feel like because this movie pays such a homage to the classic Universal monster movies, especially the one from like 1932. It takes so much of the plot and the characters. It tries to be as faithful to that movie as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes with a movie, the simplest titles are the best titles.
I agree.
Because I feel like once you get like a title by committee, you end up with something like Edge of Tomorrow, which makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like a generic action movie thing about tomorrow and what is the edge of tomorrow? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, is that just tomorrow evening?
Yeah, exactly. But that movie is so fantastic.
Yeah.
That they then decided to rebrand it because they were like, well, you know, people aren't getting this title.
Yeah.
And I feel like with a movie like The Mummy, I mean, I'm sure that you could call it something else. But I feel like sometimes when you're paying homage to something, sometimes the simplest way is the best way. It'd be like calling an adaptation of Dracula, I don't know, Vlad or something like that. It's like, but what is Vlad? Like, who is
why
Vlad?
do that?
Like that. Exactly. Like, okay, the character's based on Vlad the Impaler, but a lot of movie-going audiences aren't going to understand it. They're just going to go, well, I don't want to see a movie called Vlad.
I know.
What's that about?
We had that same problem several years ago, and I will defend this film till the day I die. John Carter, I think, is a brilliant, brilliant film. The choice to call it John Carter was a really bad decision. And I know that there was some marketing team that said you can't use the word Mars in the title because movies with Mars in the title fail. That just made no sense to me, because if you had called this movie John Carter of Mars or Warlord of Mars or Princess of Mars, any of those titles that come from the books it's based on, I think it would have done infinitely better.
But that's the thing. And I've also done John Carter on my podcast as well. And I remember talking about this in that episode, about how ludicrous it was that they had Edgar Rice Burroughs, who's one of the most well-known authors of all time.
Yeah.
You know, the guy who wrote Tarzan.
Yeah.
You wouldn't call a Tarzan movie anything other than Tarzan.
Exactly. Yep.
And then you take a book like A Princess of Mars.
One of my favourite books.
And you don't call it A Princess of Mars?
Yeah.
You give it like a generic dude's name. Like, and I know that the guy's called John Carter, but audiences don't know John Carter. They not as much as they know Tarzan.
And it's so frustrating because that's actually a really good adaptation, and I would have loved to have seen at least one more of the books adapted, but we'll never get that now.
It's really decent.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people won't give it the time of day because A, it's called John Carter, and B, because people have heard that it's a bad movie. It's not a bad movie.
It's just a flop.
Really good.
I mean, look at Blade Runner 2049. It's in the top 10 box office flops of all time, and yet it's renownedly a good movie.
I actually prefer it to Blade Runner. And I know that's controversial.
So you've already said that you're a 10 out of 10 on this film, which is very, very awesome. I'm a 9. I love this movie so much. I can't quite justify the 10, but it's one of those things where realistically, if I'm going with my heart, there's no reason not to give this a 10 other than I just know that I don't know.
You see, I went on movie reviews in 20 Qs about this movie, and I gave it a really, really large hyperbole sandwich. Like I'm talking like millions out of 10,000. And yeah, I appreciate that it has flaws, but sometimes you kind of got to look at it that everything has flaws. Everyone has flaws. Yeah. No one is perfect and nothing is perfect. And so you just kind of accept the flaws as part of what makes that person or that thing something that you like. And I can take the flaws of The Mummy and kind of accept them. I still think it's the greatest movie ever made. And I've been quoted that I think that, and I genuinely do. Because if a movie is this rewatchable and this much fun, and I can continue to watch it, and I can continue to talk about it on many podcasts, and I will continue to talk about it on many podcasts, then I think that just kind of summarizes why it's the greatest movie ever made.
You know what? That's a really beautiful, romantic way of putting it, and you've turned me around. I'm a 10 now. I have to agree with that. I can't deny that way of thinking. So I'm a 10 as well.
Well, I wasn't expecting to change your mind, but I'm really happy that I did.
Well, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this wonderful movie. Can you tell everybody where they can find Verbal Diorama and the wonderful show that it is and everything that you do?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Billy. This has just been genuinely so much fun. And I apologise because we've kind of ran quite over time.
Oh, please.
But I did tell you that it was possible. So yeah, I am not responsible for the length of time of this episode. But yes, my podcast is Verbal Diorama. And I talk about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. So if you are in any way interested in, well, I've mentioned quite a few episodes on this episode already that I've covered, but I'm almost at over 125. Let's say over 125 episodes so far. In almost 3 years. So I'm doing quite good. And yeah, they mostly are all solo episodes as well. I do have a couple of guests occasionally, but mostly it's just me. And yeah, if you want to find me, just search Verbal Diorama on your podcast app of choice. Or you can, I guess if you just want to talk to me about The Mummy, feel free, because I love talking about this movie, then hit me up on social media. I am at Verbal Diorama on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. So yeah, say hi.
It's an excellent show. I'd highly recommend it. I love that you do such a diverse range of movies. You know, like you say, it's the movies you know, movies you don't. You've done giant movies that everyone knows about, but you also cover, you know, these little movies that not everybody will have heard of that, quite frankly, they should have. So it's a great show. It's always, unlike this show, very thoroughly researched and prepared, and I can't recommend it enough. So everybody should go check it out for sure.
Thank you. Well, you know, it's I try and be as thorough as possible with research and stuff, but the fact that your podcast is not research does not make it any less of a wonderful podcast, let me just say.
Well, thank you very much. Next week, all going well, I'll be joined by M. Higgins from Tasteless talking about the new Scream movie, which I have been excited about for a very long time. So looking forward to that one. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do that at wewatchedathing.com or wewatchedathing@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the handle at wewatchedathing. If you want to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/wewatchedathing, and I'll catch you next week.